From lost student to master of my own path, my journey of courage and overcoming. When I look back, I realize how certain phases of life silently shape us. Sometimes what we call failure is simply fate's way of repositioning us. Back then, I didn't have that clarity. All I saw was the fall, the emptiness, and the feeling that the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. I remember waking up every day with a heavy head, trying to pretend I was okay, even when the mirror said otherwise. The people around me seemed to be moving forward, and I felt stuck. Not for lack of will, but because I didn't know where else to go. It was in this space of uncertainty that I began to find myself, albeit slowly, stumbling over my own limitations. Back then, I believed success was a straight line, something achieved with effort and discipline, like a graph that only goes up. But life taught me that it doesn't work that way. There are curves, detours, pauses, and it was during one of those pauses that everything began to change. I was in my last semester of college, dealing with the weight of expectations, my own and others. The final project was what would define my future, and I wanted to prove myself. I worked all night, giving up rest and simple moments, thinking that dedication would be enough to earn recognition. But the result wasn't what I expected, and that failed message hit me like a punch. My first reaction was silence. I simply couldn't speak. I felt as if all my effort had been erased in seconds. I saw colleagues being praised while I was just trying to hide the lump in my throat. Pride prevented me from admitting the pain, so I smiled. But inside, there was chaos no one could have imagined. I began to doubt my talent, my ability, and even myself. The mind is treacherous in these moments. It makes us believe that one mistake defines who we are. It took me a while to understand that failure is actually just a crude form of learning, and that behind every no, there's a silent invitation to start over. For weeks, I avoided talking about it. I distanced myself from friends, turned off notifications, and sank into a kind of solitude that, while painful, was necessary. Deep down, I knew I couldn't continue in that state, but I also didn't have the energy to react. Then something simple happened, an unexpected conversation with a professor who always watched me from afar. He said just one sentence, "Arthur, sometimes the right path reveals itself when the plan goes wrong." That echoed in my head. Maybe he was right. Maybe the failure wasn't the end, but the beginning of a turning point I couldn't yet see. Over time, I revisited the project, not with the same desperation as before, but with a new perspective. I stopped trying to prove something and began to understand what I truly wanted to create. It was liberating to realize that the value of what we do lies not only in the result, but in the intention we put into each gesture. I rewrote everything unhurriedly, allowing myself to make mistakes, adjust, and start over as many times as necessary. In that process, I realized I was rebuilding more than just a work. I was rebuilding myself. Gradually, I realized that what we call failure is merely a reflection of what we haven't yet learned about ourselves. It was during this time of silence that I began to look within more honestly. It wasn't easy to face my own weaknesses, to recognize that I had followed a path more out of fear than choice. Engineering, which had previously seemed like a solid destiny, began to reveal itself as a form of armor. I used that course to protect myself from doubt, uncertainty, and above all, the possibility of self-disappointment. When I stopped hiding behind this facade, I understood that I no longer wanted to be the Arthur who pleased everyone. I wanted to discover who I truly was. It was at that moment that the weight of family expectations fell upon me with full force. My father was always a logical, straightforward man who believed that life is built in straight lines. He grew up hearing that stability was synonymous with success, and he instilled this in me from an early age. When I decided to drop out of college, he didn't understand. There was no argument, but his silence spoke louder than any words. My mother tried to mediate, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Fear of seeing me fail, fear that I would lose my way, and deep down, I was afraid too. Only it was a different fear, that of spending my entire life being someone I wasn't. The first month away from college was a mixture of relief and panic. Relief at having breathed outside that bubble of pressure, and panic at not knowing what would come next. I woke without an alarm clock, but also without purpose. The hours passed slowly, and the silence of the room seemed to swallow me. Then, one random night, rummaging through old things, I found a box of electronic components from my teenage years. They were leftovers from projects I'd assembled for fun, when curiosity was my only motivation. That sparked something. I set up a small makeshift workbench and started experimenting again, without any pretense. And curiously, that simple gesture rekindled a part of me that had been dormant. As the weeks passed, that hobby became a kind of refuge. I began studying on my own, immersing myself in videos, forums, books, and technical articles. What had previously been just curiosity began to transform into passion. I realized that learning could be enjoyable when it made sense to me. It was a new feeling. I studied out of desire, not obligation. And it was through this process that I began developing small projects and posting them online. Without pretense, without trying to prove anything, just sharing what made me feel good. When the first positive comments arrived, it was like a breath of fresh air after so long stuck underwater. These small encouragements gave me strength. With each message from someone saying they liked what I was doing, a part of my self-confidence returned. It was at that point that I understood something essential. The most important recognition doesn't come from others, it comes from within. When we reconnect with what we love, the rest falls into place over time. I still didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I felt no rush. I just wanted to keep learning, building, and above all, allowing myself to be imperfect. Because it was precisely through mistakes, pauses, and doubts that I began to understand the true meaning of moving forward. Over time, what began as a distraction became a new purpose. I began accepting small repair and automation jobs, things I learned by doing. I created a profile on a freelance platform, even though I didn't really believe anyone would be interested. At first, there were few orders, often low-paying, but each delivery was a personal victory. It was as if, with each project, I regained a piece of my self-esteem. I found myself learning not only about electronics and design, but also about responsibility, patience, and confidence. I realized that the freedom I so desperately sought came with a burden, the burden of choice. And for the first time, that burden didn't scare me. Still, not everything was a success. There were days when fear returned, disguised as doubt. I wondered if I was deluding myself, if my choice had been courageous or simply reckless. With each new bill that arrived, reality knocked on the door, and I found myself caught between dream and necessity. My parents, especially my father, continued to wait for the moment when I would return to college. Sometimes I almost gave in. I even opened the university website more than once, but always stopped at the same screen, confirm enrollment, and I simply couldn't click. Something inside me screamed that going back would be a betrayal of everything I had endured to get there. It was amidst this mix of uncertainty that a new opportunity arose. One of my projects caught the attention of an engineer at a startup looking for creative ideas for rapid prototyping. He sent me a message praising my work and asking if I'd be willing to participate in a test project. I remember reading and rereading that email over and over, trying to believe it was real. I agreed, even though I didn't have enough experience. I spent entire nights studying and testing. They were exhausting, but also exciting. Days. When I finished the prototype and submitted the report, I felt butterflies in my stomach that mixed fear and hope. A few days later, he responded with a phrase I've never forgotten. "You have talent, Arthur. Keep going." That message changed everything. It wasn't just a compliment, it was a sign, a reminder that perhaps I really was on the right path. From there, things began to take shape. Other jobs appeared, new connections formed, and little by little, my name began to circulate among people I admired. It wasn't stability yet, but it was growth, and more than that, it was belonging. For the first time, I felt like I was part of something that truly represented me. It wasn't about status, nor about proving anything. It was about finding meaning in what I was doing with my own hands. But even with the progress, my relationship with my father remained difficult. He couldn't see the value in what I was doing. He thought I was wasting my time and talent. Every conversation ended with a "you can still come back in time," and I silently swallowed the lump in my throat. I didn't blame him. He was just repeating what he'd learned all his life. But it hurt. It hurt to see that, even giving it my all, it still wasn't enough in his eyes. And it was at that point that I understood one of the hardest lessons of adulthood. Sometimes, growing up is accepting that not everyone will understand your path, and still keeping going. It was during this period that I had the idea to create something of my own. I knew there were other talented young people like me who lacked opportunities. I decided to develop a platform that connected small freelance engineers and technicians with companies looking for quick and creative solutions. At first, the idea seemed almost impossible. No team, no investment, and little business experience. But I had something valuable, a desire to learn and the courage to try. I started sketching ideas, studying programming, design, and marketing. Every night turned into dawn. Every mistake turned into a learning experience. For the first time, I felt my efforts had a purpose greater than myself. The following months were exhausting. I woke up early, studied during the day, and tested the platform's features at night. I did everything myself: layout, registration, integration with companies. There were dozens of failures, sleepless nights, and constant doubts. But unlike the Arthur before, I didn't give up. Each obstacle was a lesson. When the first version of the app was ready, I looked at the screen and felt tears well up. Not because it was perfect, but because that project reflected my entire journey. Failures, persistence, authenticity. For the first time, I was putting something into the world that carried my essence. I launched the app without any investment, using only social media to promote my story and the platform's proposal. The response exceeded all expectations. Within days, the first professionals began signing up, and companies showed interest in the solutions. It was small, but real. For the first time, my father called me without mentioning college. He had heard about the project and said, in a subdued voice, "Congratulations, son. I'm proud." They were few words, but they carried more weight than any compliment I had ever received. I cried with gratitude, understanding that this recognition was the beginning of a reconciliation with myself and with him. As the platform grew, new challenges arose. I needed to learn about finance, marketing, management, and contracts. I made mistakes, trusted the wrong people, and lost money. But now every failure was a learning experience. I no longer sought to prove anything to anyone. I sought to evolve, build something useful, and open doors for others like me. Gradually, I realized that my mission went beyond technology. It was to create opportunities and show that talent doesn't depend on a diploma or external approval. It was the realization of a dream that until recently seemed impossible. Even with everything progressing, there were days of insecurity. I wondered if I deserved to be there, if it was just luck or true competence. During these times, I remembered the late nights studying, the mistakes and the failed projects. I remembered the fear, the anxiety, the silent tears in college. All of it reminded me that nothing comes easy. I took a deep breath and kept going. I learned to value the difficult days as much as the triumphant ones, and to ask for help when needed. I assembled a small team, passionate about the project, and we transformed that isolated dream into something alive, pulsating and inspiring. For the first time, I felt I had created something bigger than myself. 2 years after the platform launched, I received an email that changed everything. It was from a tech company interested in acquiring the project. At first, I thought it was a scam. It seemed too good to be true, but it was real. They had been following my growth and wanted to make an offer. In the following weeks, I immersed myself in meetings, legal reviews, and negotiations. I, who had never participated in anything like this, was in front of executives discussing values I never imagined. I remember sitting alone one night, trying to absorb the scale of what was happening. The boy who cried in the college bathroom was about to sell something born from his own efforts. Life, I realized, is not linear. It tears down, rebuilds, and surprises those who have the courage. When I signed the contract, my hands were shaking. It wasn't just about the money, it was about meaning. Every mistake, every tear, every challenge had brought me to this point. The signature represented my journey: pain, doubt, fear, stubbornness, and faith. I spent a few minutes alone, breathing deeply, absorbing it all. For the first time, I felt true peace. Success wasn't a prize. It was the consequence of persisting when no one else believed. There were no noisy celebrations, just silence and gratitude. I had conquered myself, proven that my journey was worthwhile, even without a diploma, even without external approval. After the sale, my life changed profoundly. I began sharing my story in videos and lectures, not as someone who had overcome everything, but as someone who learned to get back up after every fall. I received messages from people across the country saying they felt inspired, that they finally saw a way out of their own insecurities and fears. The mission I discovered was greater than technology or money. It was to show that the value of a life lies in the courage to be true to yourself, even if it means being misunderstood for a time. Today, when I look back, I see that Arthur lost between fear and a desire for acceptance. I would tell him not to blame himself, to trust his own voice, to never give up in the face of judgment or failure. I learned that making mistakes isn't a weakness, but humanity. I learned that authenticity is the most valuable asset. When you're true to yourself, the rest falls into place. Every tear, every sleepless night, every seemingly impossible project, it was all part of the path that brought me here. And the lesson is clear. No one is born ready, but every attempt brings us closer to our truth. Despite my achievements, I still face difficult days, but today, I know how to better manage fear and anxiety. I understand that happiness isn't about never failing, but about finding purpose in every step, even when I stumble. My name is Arthur, and this is my story. From a young man under pressure, anxious and lost, to someone who learned that the greatest success is living authentically. Every challenge, every mistake, and every achievement has shaped me, and for the first time I feel genuine peace. The message I leave is simple. No one defines your story but you. Choose to listen to your voice and forge your own path, even if the world tries to convince you otherwise.